I sat perfectly still in the sterile, glass-walled HR office, staring at the termination papers sliding across the polished mahogany desk. Across from me sat my boss, a man with a perfectly tailored designer suit, a smug, pearly white smile, and a sense of entitlement so massive it practically sucked the oxygen out of the room. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. He wasn't just my boss. He was my older brother, Julian, and on the desk, right next to my severance agreement, his phone was propped up on a stand. Through the screen, our parents were on FaceTime, watching my humiliation live, nodding in solemn agreement as Julian called me a useless, insubordinate anchor dragging down his department. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even defend myself. I just picked up the pen, signed the paper, and walked out into the pouring rain with my cardboard box of belongings. My family thought they had finally broken me. They thought they had permanently established the natural order of things, Julian at the top and me groveling in the dirt. But they had absolutely no idea what I had been quietly building in the shadows. They didn't know that my signature on that termination paper was the final key to my freedom. And they certainly didn't know that exactly 1 week later, Julian would be sitting in the waiting room of a multi-million-dollar tech firm, sweating through his expensive suit, desperately waiting to interview for a job, without realizing that the CEO he was about to beg for a paycheck was me. To understand how my own brother became my boss and how my parents actively cheered for my downfall, you have to understand the twisted, suffocating dynamic I was raised in. From the moment I was born, I was the designated shadow, a backdrop designed exclusively to make my older brother shine brighter. Julian was the golden child. He was charming, conventionally handsome, and possessed a manipulative charisma that completely blinded our parents to his staggering incompetence. If Julian got a C in school, my parents threw a party to celebrate his creative genius that couldn't be confined by standard grading. If I got an A-, I was grounded for a week for not applying myself. I was the workhorse. I was the one who mowed the lawn, fixed the leaky sinks, and quietly taught myself how to write code on a broken second-hand laptop I bought from a pawn shop. My parents had a deeply ingrained, completely delusional narrative. Julian was destined to be a wealthy visionary, a titan of industry. I, on the other hand, was deemed the practical one, which was their polite way of saying I was born to serve. When Julian crashed his brand new graduation car, a Mercedes my parents took out a second mortgage to afford, they blamed me for not checking his tire pressure. When Julian dropped out of his expensive private university because the professors were too demanding, my parents drained my meager college fund to set him up in a luxury apartment in the city so he could find himself. I learned early on that if I wanted anything in this life, I had to bleed for it in absolute silence. I paid my way through a state college by working night shifts at a data center. I ate ramen, slept 4 hours a night, and graduated at the top of my class with a degree in software engineering. I landed a mid-level development job at Nexus Solutions, a respected, rapidly growing tech firm. For 5 years, I kept my head down. I built the company's back-end infrastructure, mentored junior devs, and became the unspoken backbone of the engineering department. I made a decent living, but I lived frugally, saving every penny for a dream I kept entirely to myself. Meanwhile, Julian was flailing. He bounced from failed startup to failed startup, constantly bankrolled by our aging parents. But Julian had one undeniable skill. He knew how to network, and he knew how to lie. That was how the nightmare truly began. Nexus Solutions was undergoing a massive restructuring. The CEO, a brilliant but socially awkward engineer, wanted to bring in aggressive corporate management to scale the business. My mother, who stalked my LinkedIn profile like a hawk, saw the open position for Director of Product Development. She didn't ask me to recommend Julian. She ordered me to. "Liam, your brother has been struggling to find a company that understands his vision," my mother lectured me over the phone, her voice dripping with that familiar, condescending tone. "You already work there. You know the CEO. You are going to get Julian an interview, and you are going to make sure he gets this job. It's the least you can do after we housed and fed you for 18 years. I refused. I told her Julian had zero technical background and would destroy our department. The retaliation was swift and brutal. My father showed up at my apartment unannounced, threatening to legally sue me for the cost of my childhood, and emotionally blackmailing me by claiming the stress of Julian's unemployment was giving my mother heart palpitations. Exhausted, beaten down, and foolishly hoping that just this once they might show me a shred of gratitude, I caved. I leveraged every ounce of goodwill I had with my CEO. I polished Julian's fabricated resume. I fed him the exact buzzwords and industry jargon he needed to survive the interview. Julian got the job. He was hired as the director of product development. He was officially my boss. And instead of being grateful, he immediately set out to destroy me. The first few months of Julian's reign were a masterclass in toxic management. He strutted around the office in $3,000 suits, taking credit for every successful patch, update, and software deployment my team executed. During executive meetings, he would present my code architecture as his own visionary design, while simultaneously cutting my team's budget to inflate his own quarterly bonuses. But the real torture was how he treated me personally. He went out of his way to humiliate me in front of my colleagues. He would assign me menial tasks, formatting his spreadsheets, ordering his lunches, organizing his inbox, tasks meant for an intern, not a senior lead developer. When I pushed back, he would smile that chilling, empty smile and remind me of the power dynamic. "Careful, little brother," he whispered to me one afternoon by the coffee machine. "I sign your performance reviews. You're only here because I allow you to be. Remember your place." The worst part wasn't Julian. It was our parents. They were ecstatic. At family gatherings, they would loudly brag to the extended family about how Julian was an executive director managing a massive team, conveniently omitting the fact that I was the one doing all the actual work. If I tried to speak about my projects, my father would wave his hand dismissively. "Let Julian talk, Liam. He's the one steering the ship. You just row." But a ship steered by a blind man is bound to hit an iceberg, and Julian's iceberg was named Apex Industries. Apex Industries was a global logistics conglomerate, and they were looking for a completely new, AI-driven software architecture to manage their global supply chain. It was a contract worth $20 million. Julian, desperate to secure a massive commission and solidify his spot in the C-suite, promised Apex that Nexus Solutions could deliver a fully functional, revolutionary prototype in 3 months. It was a blatant, impossible lie. Nexus didn't have the technology, the infrastructure, or the manpower to build what Julian had promised. When the CEO asked Julian how he planned to achieve it, Julian threw me under the bus. He claimed I had been secretly developing the framework and that it was nearly ready. Panic set in. Julian called me into his office, locking the door behind him. His usual arrogant swagger was replaced by frantic, sweating desperation. "I need you to build the Apex prototype," Julian demanded, pacing the room. "I need it in 8 weeks. Work nights, work weekends, I don't care. Get it done." I stared at him, crossing my arms. "What you promised them is mathematically impossible with our current server architecture. It would take a team of 20 engineers a year to build that from scratch." "Then figure it out," Julian screamed, slamming his hands on the desk. "If we lose this contract, the CEO is going to fire me. Do you understand? I'm on the verge of making partner. You have to fix this." I looked at my brother, watching him unravel, and I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew something he didn't. For the past 3 years, working late nights and weekends in the absolute secrecy of my own apartment, I had been building a revolutionary AI logistics platform. It was my passion project, entirely distinct from my work at Nexus. I had written every line of code myself, on my own equipment, on my own time. 2 months prior, I had quietly established an LLC, Aegis Tech, and officially patented the entire software architecture. It was flawless. It was exactly what Apex Industries needed. But it wasn't Nexus's property. It wasn't Julian's. It was mine. "I can't help you, Julian," I said calmly. "You made a promise you can't keep. That's your problem." I walked out of his office, leaving him hyperventilating. The escalation was immediate. 3 days later, I was summoned to my parents' house for an emergency family dinner. I knew it was an ambush the moment I walked through the door. The dining room table was set with their finest china. My mother, my father, and Julian were already seated, a united, hostile front waiting for their target. There was no small talk. As soon as I sat down, my father slammed a thick manila folder onto the table and slid it toward me. "What is this?" I asked, eyeing the folder cautiously. "It's a transfer of intellectual property agreement," my father said, his voice hard, authoritative, leaving no room for argument. "Julian told us about the little side project you've been working on at home. The AI thing. He says it's exactly what his company needs to secure the Apex contract." My blood ran cold. I had mentioned my side project to my mother in passing over a year ago, foolishly seeking a sliver of maternal pride. She had weaponized it. "That project belongs to my LLC," I said, my voice dangerously low. "It has nothing to do with Nexus. It is my personal property, completely patented and legally protected." "Don't be selfish, Liam," my mother snapped, her face twisting with sudden rage. "Your brother's entire career is on the line. If he lands this contract, he becomes a partner. His future will be set. You're just a programmer. You have no idea how to market or sell something like that anyway. You need to sign the rights over to Julian." I stared at them, absolute disbelief washing over me. "You want me to sign away 3 years of my life, my personal intellectual property, a multi-million-dollar asset, so Julian can take the credit and save his own job?" "He's the face of the family, Liam," my father said bluntly, looking at me with cold, calculating eyes. "He has the charisma. He has the presence. You are the hands. You build the engine, but Julian drives the car. That's how the real world works. You owe him this. We paid for your entire childhood. Now it's time to pay us back." The sheer audacity, the staggering delusion of their demand finally broke whatever lingering tether of familial obligation I had left. I looked at Julian. He sat there, swirling a glass of wine, a smug, entitled smirk resting on his face, entirely confident that our parents would bully me into submission just like they always did. "No," I said softly. The room went dead silent. "What did you say?" my father growled, his face turning red. I said no. I am not giving Julian my company. I am not saving him from his own incompetence. And I am done being the sacrificial lamb for this family. I stood up, pushing my chair back. My mother burst into theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands. "You are destroying this family. You are so jealous of your brother that you'd rather see him homeless than help him." Julian stood up, slamming his wineglass down, his face flushed with fury. "You think you're so smart, Liam? If you don't sign that paper, you are dead to me. You are dead to this family, and as of tomorrow morning, you are unemployed." "Do what you have to do, Julian," I replied, turning my back on them and walking toward the door. "If you walk out that door, don't ever come back," my father roared. "You are no longer our son." I didn't pause. I opened the door and walked out into the cool night air. For the first time in 28 years, I breathed deeply. I was finally free. The next morning, the execution was carried out. Julian called me into the HR office. The HR director looked incredibly uncomfortable, staring down at her notepad. Julian, however, was practically glowing with sadistic joy. He had set his phone on the desk, a live FaceTime call connecting our parents to witness my punishment. "Liam," Julian began, his voice dripping with fake corporate solemnity, though his eyes danced with malice. "Despite our best efforts to integrate you into the team, your performance has severely declined. You have shown a gross lack of insubordination, an inability to meet basic project deadlines, and frankly, you are useless to this department's future goals. Effective immediately, your employment at Nexus Solutions is terminated." From the phone speaker, I heard my mother's voice. "That's what happens to selfish people, Liam. Let this be a lesson to you." Julian slid a piece of paper across the desk. "Sign this non-disclosure and severance agreement. We'll give you 2 weeks' pay, a generous offer considering how useless you've been." I picked up the pen. I didn't read the document because I didn't care. I knew that without me, the entire back-end infrastructure of Nexus was going to collapse within a week. I knew that the Apex contract was entirely doomed. I signed my name with a flourish, stood up, and looked directly into Julian's eyes. "Good luck with the Apex presentation on Friday, Julian," I smiled. "I really hope you know how to code." His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but I was already turning away. I walked out of the building, went home, opened my laptop, and made a phone call I had been preparing for weeks. I called the Chief Technology Officer of Apex Industries. I bypassed Nexus entirely. I introduced myself as the CEO of Aegis Tech. I explained that I understood their exact logistical pain points, and I requested a 1-hour virtual demonstration of my fully completed, patented AI architecture. Desperate for a solution, the CTO agreed. The demonstration blew their minds. My software didn't just meet their requirements, it exceeded them by a decade. When I explained that I owned the exclusive rights and was ready for immediate deployment, they didn't hesitate. Within 72 hours of my firing, Apex Industries officially pulled their contract negotiations with Nexus Solutions and signed an 8-figure exclusive licensing and development deal with Aegis Tech. The fallout at Nexus was apocalyptic. When Apex formally withdrew, citing the fact that Nexus had absolutely no viable prototype, the CEO of Nexus demanded answers from Julian. Julian, having no code, no team lead, and no scapegoat, completely unraveled. In a desperate bid to save himself, he tried to throw the rest of the engineering team under the bus, but they all walked out in protest, citing Julian's toxic abuse. 4 days after he fired me, Julian was escorted out of the Nexus building by security, publicly terminated for gross incompetence, fraud, and losing the biggest contract in the company's history. Word traveled fast in our city's tech sphere. Julian was effectively blacklisted. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. With my new 8-figure contract secured, Aegis Tech exploded overnight. I needed to scale immediately. I leased a massive, high-end office space in the downtown tech district. I hired an elite HR firm to urgently recruit upper-level project managers and directors. I instructed them to keep my identity as the CEO completely anonymous during the initial hiring phases to avoid industry bias. The company was simply known as Aegis Tech. Exactly 7 days after I sat in that HR office and was called useless, my lead recruiter walked into my massive corner office and handed me a stack of resumes for the senior project manager position. "We have a few strong candidates, sir," the recruiter said, "but there's one guy sitting in the lobby right now. Honestly, his technical skills are non-existent, and his references are terrible, but he practically begged for an interview. He said he was willing to take a massive pay cut. The guy is sweating bullets out there." I looked down at the resume on top of the pile. Name: Julian Evans. Previous title: Director of Product Development, Nexus Solutions. A slow, terrifyingly peaceful smile spread across my face. It was perfect. It was a level of poetic justice so profound you couldn't script it. Julian, completely ruined, had seen a blind posting for a highly paid management role at a newly funded tech firm and jumped at it like a starving dog. He had no idea he was sitting in my company. "Tell the candidate I will conduct this interview personally," I told the recruiter. "Put him in conference room B and give me 10 minutes. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, taking a deep breath to steady the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Then, I headed down the glass corridor toward the conference room. As I approached the glass walls of room B, I saw him. Julian was pacing back and forth. His suit was wrinkled. His hair was messy. He looked 10 years older, the arrogant swagger completely beaten out of him by reality. And sitting in the plush chairs near the back of the massive room were my parents. They had actually come with him. I could hear my mother's muffled voice through the glass door. "Don't be nervous, sweetie," she cooed, fixing his tie. "You're a brilliant executive. This new company would be lucky to have you. Once you secure this job, we'll go downstairs to that fancy steakhouse to celebrate." I pushed the heavy glass door open. "I'm afraid you'll have to cancel those dinner reservations," I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. The three of them froze. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Julian spun around, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and immediate, boiling rage. "Liam?" Julian barked, his face turning red. "What the hell are you doing here? Are you following me? Did you get a job as the IT guy here or something?" My father stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Listen here, you ungrateful little brat. We told you never to show your face to us again. You are trying to sabotage your brother's interview. I demand you leave this building immediately before I call security." I didn't flinch. I slowly walked to the head of the massive obsidian conference table and pulled out the large leather executive chair. I sat down, leaning back, mirroring the exact posture Julian had used when he fired me. I placed Julian's resume on the table and gently tapped it with my pen. "Security works for me, Dad," I said calmly. "And I'm not here to sabotage an interview. I'm here to conduct it." The silence that followed was suffocating. It was heavy, thick, and absolute. Julian stared at me, his brain desperately trying to process the information. He looked from me, to the expensive suit I was wearing, to the resume under my hand, to the massive corporate logo of Aegis Tech frosted onto the glass wall behind me. "No," Julian whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. "No, that's impossible. Aegis Tech. They're the ones who stole the Apex contract. They're a massive corporation. You can't." "Aegis Tech is my LLC, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "The AI platform you demanded I give to you? The one Mom and Dad demanded I surrender to save your job? That was Aegis. I took it directly to Apex. They signed an 8-figure contract with me on Tuesday. By Wednesday, you were fired. And now, on Friday, you're sitting in my building, applying for a job in a company I built from the ground up." My mother's knees literally gave out. She collapsed into one of the plush chairs, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, completely unable to form words. My father looked as though he had been struck by lightning, his jaw unhinged, his eyes darting frantically around the opulent conference room as the crushing reality of my wealth and status crashed down on him. Julian began to hyperventilate. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. You set me up. You ruined my life. You planned this." "I didn't plan anything, Julian," I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "You did this to yourself. You fired the only person who actually knew how to do the work. You called me useless. You told me I was dead weight, so I proved you wrong." I picked up his resume and held it up to the light. "Looking at your qualifications," I continued, mimicking his exact corporate tone from a week prior, "you have absolutely no technical skills, a history of gross mismanagement, and you were recently terminated for fraud. You are, quite frankly, useless to my company's future goals." I tore the resume in half and let the pieces flutter onto the pristine glass table. "You're not getting the job, Julian." My mother suddenly burst into tears, launching herself out of the chair and rushing toward the table. Her previous venom was instantly replaced by a sickening, desperate fawning. Liam, baby, wait," she sobbed, reaching out as if to touch my hand, though I pulled it back in disgust. "We didn't know. We didn't understand how brilliant you truly were. We were just stressed. You're family. You own this whole company. You have to hire your brother. You have to take care of us. We can all work together, a family business." "We can put the past behind us, son," my father stammered, stepping forward with a weak, trembling smile, his previous threats entirely forgotten in the face of immense wealth. "We're proud of you. We always knew you had potential." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of their words made me physically nauseous. For a brief second, I looked at the three of them. The parents who had emotionally abused me for decades, and the brother who had tried to destroy me for his own ego. They were pathetic, broken, and begging at the feet of the son they had thrown away like garbage. "Family?" I asked quietly, looking directly into my mother's desperate, pleading eyes. "A week ago, you told me I was dead to you. You told me I was no longer your son." I stood up from the chair, buttoning my suit jacket. I am holding you to that promise, I said with absolute finality. I have no family. I have a company to run. I pressed a button on the intercom system on the table. Security to conference room B, please. We have 3 unauthorized individuals who need an escort out of the building, permanently. Liam, please! Julian screamed, tears finally spilling down his cheeks as the heavy glass doors opened and 2 large security guards stepped in. I'm bankrupt. I have nothing. You can't do this to me. Watch me, I whispered. I didn't stay to watch them get dragged out. I didn't need to. I turned my back on their screaming, their crying, and their pathetic apologies, and I walked out the side door of the conference room, stepping back into the quiet hum of my newly built empire. As I walked down the hallway toward my corner office, the heavy weight that I had carried on my chest since childhood completely evaporated. For 28 years, I had believed their narrative. I had believed I was a secondary character in Julian's life, destined to serve and suffer. But as I sat down at my massive desk, looking out at the city skyline stretched out before me, I finally understood the truth. I was never the shadow. I was the foundation. And now, I was building my own castle.